Bring in show music, please.
This is Squawk Pod, and I'm CNBC producer Cameron Costa. On today's episode, a ceasefire in the Middle East. As Israel and Hamas exchange hostages and Palestinian prisoners, President Trump declares a new age in the region.
This is the historic dawn of a new Middle East.
President Biden's lead negotiator between Israel and Hezbollah, Amos Hochstein, is also looking forward.
I think the real question is, what do you do from here? And I don't want to take away. Today is a tremendously great moment.
Then former Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger.
Are we in an AI bubble? Of course.
AI and the chips race against China.
Today, I think the number is 49 reactors under construction in China and 0 in the U.S., right?
Wow.
You know, these are dreadful numbers.
Plus, the other stories that got us squawking today, like JPMorgan's strategy to bolster America, a trade dispute with China over rare earth minerals, and Warner Brothers Discovery rejecting a takeover bid.
I might be able to get it. Now you're part of Versant, so there.
It's Monday, October 13th, 2025, and Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We're live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick along with Joe Kernen and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
Before we get to the rest of it, we do have some breaking news right now on JPMorgan, and Leslie Picker's got that news for us this morning. Leslie.
Hey, and good morning, Andrew. JPMorgan announcing a $1.5 trillion national security and economic resiliency initiative, a 10-year plan involving financing medium and large companies and making direct investments off its balance sheet. The initiative, according to a press release, will focus on 4 key areas, including supply chain and advanced manufacturing, defense and aerospace, energy independence, and strategic technologies. Chairman and CEO Jamie Dimon saying in the release, quote, "It has become painfully clear that the United States has allowed itself to become too reliant on unreliable sources of critical minerals, products, and manufacturing, all of which are essential for our national security." JPMorgan had already planned to finance about $1 trillion over the next decade in these areas, but today's announcement increases that target by 50%. The firm will also make direct equity and venture capital investments of as much as $10 billion. JPMorgan will hire more bankers, investment professionals, and other experts and create an external advisory council to help guide its long-term strategy. The initiative will include research on private companies and supply chain management issues related to rare earths, AI, and technology. And the firm also plans to advocate for policies to bolster this initiative, including R&D, permitting, procurement, and regulations. Dimon saying in the release, quote, "Hopefully, once again, as America has in the past, we will come together to address these immense challenges. We need to act now." We'll hear more from Dimon about the initiative at 10:30 a.m. this morning, and hopefully how it plays a role amid rising geopolitical tensions with China, guys.
So just go back in time for us a little bit. I don't remember ever hearing an announcement of this kind of magnitude from a bank, let alone JPMorgan, about sort of where they were going to be prioritizing either investments or financing in this kind of way. I mean, there were times when they looked at cities like Detroit, for example, and said, we want to help finance Detroit or other things. This seems very different.
Yeah, that was my take, too, when I first read the release, was this was a very different thing here. Now, they have already had this strategy of $1 trillion worth of financing areas that were key to national security. And Dimon has spoken for years in his annual letter about the need to kind of safeguard national security, and he was worried about cyber, and he was worried about rising tensions with China. He wrote that, or he had that interview with the FT where he talked about how important it was for the U.S. to come to the table with China to have a conversation and ensure that talks were happening. This was, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. But in terms of kind of coming out with this big initiative that's all-encompassing and hiring bankers and investment professionals and covering it for research, no, this does feel very different.
And so in terms of how this is going to play out, I mean, some people are going to look at this announcement and think it's a little bit like when, you hear Apple say that they're going to invest a certain amount of money in the United States, or OpenAI will say that they're going to, and there are these sort of grand announcements that then the president often cites and other things. How is this different?
I mean, I think, in terms of financing, these certain industries, I think this is something that they probably see as just good for business anyway. If you think about just safeguarding and putting money into and financing energy infrastructure, I mean, that's something that's growing. That's the whole AI exposure. That's an area that's growing. So that's something JPMorgan wants to be a part of because it is good for their bottom line as well. So I think they see concentric circles here in terms of overlap for what they believe is important or what Diamond and his team believes is important versus what's also good for the company as well.
And then finally, Leslie, in terms of looking at what JPMorgan is doing in this space relative to other banks, other private credit firms, how do they compare?
So it's also interesting timing on that front too, Andrew, because we are seeing this shift from private credit back to the syndicated loan market for some big deals. I mean, it's a newer trend that we're seeing, but if you recall over the last few years, the pendulum had been swinging the other direction toward private credit. And lately that has shifted a little bit. So whether this is the beginning of that or not remains to be seen. But as it pertains to things like data center financing and energy infrastructure and some of these other types of deals, banks are kind of back in terms of being competitive here, especially as regulations appear to be diminishing for them. And as rates decrease, they can provide, in many cases, a much more competitive rate to the borrower than, say, some of their private peers.
Fair enough. Leslie, thank you for bringing us that news. And we look forward to seeing what Jamie says later today.
President Trump also softening his tone on China after Friday's threat of new 100% tariffs on that country starting November 1st. Eunice Yoon is tracking all the latest developments in this story, and she joins us now with more, including the reaction in China. Eunice, good to see you.
Thanks, Becky. Well, after getting a strong response from the U.S., the Chinese are defending their approach to expand their export curbs. The Foreign Ministry today said the U.S. has continuously introduced a series of restrictions and sanctions against China, which have severely harmed China's interests. China firmly opposes this. So in other words, from Beijing's perspective, the Chinese are merely responding to what the U.S. already does. The Chinese are also threatening to retaliate against President Trump's 100% tariff threat. The Commerce Ministry over the weekend had pledged to take what they described as corresponding measures. At the same time, the Chinese appear to be trying to head off some of the negative response that they've been receiving from the U.S. for these expanded rare earths curbs, saying that the curbs do not equate a ban. There is speculation among China watchers as to what really has been motivating the Chinese decision to expand the rare earth curbs at this time, at a time when there are ongoing negotiations between the U.S. and China and an expected meeting between President Trump and President Xi at APEC at the end of this month. It could also, one line of thinking anyway, is that the Chinese potentially see this as a way to extract more concessions out of the U.S., so ramping up the pressure ahead of that expected meeting. There's also a line of thinking that this could be a way for re-escalating because the negotiations aren't going very well. Guys?
Eunice, I guess the big question comes down to how the response was received and then the backing off that President Trump kind of did on Air Force One, saying, we think we'll get things worked out. Has there been any state response to that?
Not on that particular post, but based on the response that we're seeing out of the Chinese, it seems as though the Chinese do not intend to back down or change their stance on their rare earths curbs. I think it potentially could mean that they believe that this is a good way to add leverage in these discussions to be able to get more concessions. And from the Chinese perspective, it would be seen that the ball is now in President Trump's court. So if he doesn't respond, that could mean that we wouldn't necessarily see any more escalation. Of course, if he does respond, then we would see an escalation, at least from the Chinese
do they want?
Have been pledging that.
I mean, Eunice, it really depends on who's in a better position to whether the moves made on each side. And, obviously China doing okay, but this is going to take us a large bite out of manufacturing. In fact, people are calling it de facto an embargo of China, who's going to do business with China. So we'll see how long they can do this. And, we were talking on Friday, this was the rare metal move was someone called it the economic equivalent of nuclear war. So when they were pointing at someone who shorted the market and made some money on Friday. Anybody that couldn't, not everyone knew it was going to be down 800 points, but you knew Trump, given that, 0.1% of the value is going to be looked at by China. You knew that there was going to be a move later in the session from Trump, and the way he's been with China in the past, it wasn't surprising at all. He said, okay, we're going back to 100%, market sells off. But I'm just wondering who's in a better position. We've got a labor market slowdown over here and other, a government shutdown.
Yeah.
We've got our own problems, but I would venture that in China, things are even worse with thousands, tens of thousands of manufacturers that are going to be hit with this.
Yeah. Right. It's obviously a very big concern for the manufacturing sector. People are generally not feeling very good about the economy more broadly. But when you look at, say, the export numbers from today, there were two things that people were taking away. One was that they beat expectations, that the factories were actually doing generally okay. But the other thing that I think was more important is that only 10% now of direct shipments come from the United States. So we're already seeing that the Chinese have been trying to move away from relying on the U.S. And then the Chinese government, at least the negotiators, are quite good at figuring out what the pressure points are for President Trump specifically. So we're seeing that with the rare earths, something that he was concerned about, and then also the soybeans, because soybean imports are now at a record high here, and none of them are coming from the United States. So, you could see how the Chinese are kind of steering the negotiations away from what maybe President Trump had prioritized in the past, which is fentanyl, as well as the trade deficit possibly. And now we're talking about rare earths and soybeans and these matters that, are not so important for China and, of course, important for President Trump politically back home.
Yeah, Eunice, I guess, what are the things that the Chinese would like to ask for in these negotiations? Because we used to look at rare earth minerals as the counter to what the U.S. was doing with its export controls when it came to technology and chips. But China moved last week to say, forget it, we want to make sure we're not getting any of those chips either. We don't want those anymore. So what are they looking for in terms of leverage, and what are they asking for?
Well, what we have seen is that the Chinese ideally would like to get those tariffs off, ideally would like to have the export controls on some of the technology, on the very high-tech stuff, off so that they could be able to get their hands on that. The messaging, of course, has been conflicted. We have seen that the Chinese are trying to not have the Chinese companies rely too heavily on the U.S., but they do want to be able to get those higher-end advanced technology items.
Eunice, thank you. Eunice Yoon.
Well, the world turns in the world of media, and here's a new one for you, but maybe not new because I think we've been talking about the possibility of this for quite some time. Warner Brothers Discovery rejecting what it sees as an undervalued takeover bid from Paramount Skydance. That's according to a Bloomberg report. A couple of other reports trying to confirm some of that news. A report saying that Paramount's offer was about $20 per share. Now, Warner Brothers, per Warner Brothers share, that is. Reports also say Paramount CEO David Ellison could potentially increase his bid, appeal directly to Warner Brothers shareholders, or seek additional financial backing. We had heard a couple of reports even last week that there was conversations with some private equity firms and other things. You're looking right now at Warner Brothers stock at $17.65, so you could see why a $20 bid might not do the trick.
Gone up a little.
Gone up a little bit on the back, but it's gone up a little bit, more than a little bit on the back of just the possibility that Warner Brothers might be coming.
Like 7. That's what I mean. Yeah, I think it was
what comes next, though.
Like 7 or 8
at
one point.
Right.
But what comes next? Do they go hostile? Do they raise their bid? Like, what are the options on the table?
I think the options on the table is just
go away.
Just to go big.
Yeah.
To go big. Interestingly, Rich Greenfield, who we have on the broadcast all the time, put out a report saying, if you're David Ellison, don't do this. That the better path.
Just wait till they split.
His argument was just invest in your own content. Invest in the technology. You don't need everybody else's libraries.
Did you see Comcast shares on Friday? I mean, market was down, but 29 and change. everyone says they're Brian Roberts waiting in the wings to do this. And that's who's going to finally, that in fact, I don't know if it's true. I think this is, the guy at Fox that we used to work with all the time. Gasparino.
Oh.
Yeah.
That Comcast is the most likely, and that it would kill Brian if he let, Ellison come in.
Right, but the question has always been a different one, which is actually, does Washington allow something like that?
I believe,
right?
I understand with the way.
How big of a change, right?
The president last week called it a commie-cast, so I understand as well as anyone that whether you can get that. I might be able to get it through.
You think you could? You never. Now you're part of Versant, so there.
I think I could talk to the president. Probably. I don't know if he might say, "Go, sorry, Joe, take a hike." I don't know how deep-seated some of the feelings. I think they're pretty deep-seated. Some of Trump's problem.
Cheese will be next.
Next on Squawk Pod, we're diving into the chip and AI economy with former Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger. Intel's turnaround plan, competing with China, and setting up America for success in the tech ecosystem.
Today, we're not chip limited, we're not capital limited, we're power limited. And against that, we have underinvested in the energy resources of the nation.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Squawk Pod.
You're watching Squawk Box on CNBC. I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin along with Joe Kernen and Becky Quick. We got so much going on this morning. Let's get into the world of AI and the chips economy now with a special guest who is on the set with us this morning. Pat Gelsinger, former Intel CEO. He's now general partner at venture capital firm Playground Global. And if there's one person who knows what's going on around this whole space and around what happened at Intel, what's going on with Intel now, it is you. I'm just so curious where you land on what's transpired here, specifically before we even get into just everything else, this idea that the U.S. government is now a major shareholder in Intel.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, Becky, Joe. Just great to be on the show and see you all again. And, is the stake that the U.S. government has taken in Intel, is it good or bad? Right? And to me, the only metric that matters is, does it cause the building and filling of Intel fabs? And if it causes more fabs to be built, more fabs to be filled in the U.S., then it's good. If that doesn't occur, then it's not, right? It's a question of, policy at that point. And obviously the market responded a little bit positively to it when it was announced. We've seen some other equity come into Intel, but none of those have yet included a commitment to fill the Intel fabs. And obviously this is a good week for Intel. Right. With 18A coming across the line. I put a lot of sweat equity, deeply appreciative of the team making that happen. But the metric is build and fill fabs.
But I want to go back in time, if you will. So Gina Raimondo comes to you and says, we're thinking about doing this CHIPS Act thing. You wanted a piece of the action. And at the time, it was a grant. It was just, we're going to hand you the money under the sort of guise that this would be good for national security and resilience in the country. And that would be the benefit to the country, to the nation, not necessarily that there was also an economic component that would come straight back to taxpayers in the sort of direct way. If she had said to you, hey, Pat, we'd like to give you some money, but you're going to have to give us a little bit of equity for this, you would have said what?
Well, first, that's not how it played out, right? Remember, the CHIPS Act began under Trump 1. So it was a long process, bipartisan act being passed as a grant program. And obviously, Intel was a beneficiary. I was super disappointed, that the Gina and Department of Commerce took so long to get the money deployed, so long to get it across the line to help Intel at that point. But if the trade was, hey, we wanted to invest and we were going to drive the industry to build and fill fabs, I would say the same thing. That's a good deal if it drives the industry to build and fill fabs. We have to reshore supply chains for leading edge R&D and technology.
But Howard Lutnick has basically said this was a lousy deal for the American taxpayer. And that basically the money that was already given has effectively been squandered, and that if we're going to keep giving this kind of money away, that we should have a piece of the action.
Well, I think this administration has clearly said, hey, when they see things that aren't okay, they're ready to blow them up and reconceive them. And I think that's what you saw.
Do you believe that they're not okay then? I believe this was under your leadership.
Had they, right? I was very happy that we got the chips, the bipartisan chips across the line. I was very disappointed by how the Department of Commerce under Gina executed it, and right, the length that it took to get that money to place, 2.5 years, critical years, nothing happened. So I was quite disappointed. And for them to come in and say, that was broken, we're going to fix it in a very different way. Hey, we need to build and fill fabs.
Hey, Pat, if you looked at Intel shares for the last year, they're up by 54%. But if you look over 5 years, they're still down more than 33%. What happened besides the Biden administration taking too long? NVIDIA has taken over the world. NVIDIA's even now investing.
Think of AMD, because that was your perennial rival, was AMD. I never thought it would be.
Over that period of time. But just explain the bigger, broader picture.
Yeah, clearly, two things happen. One is, it's a long, heavy, and expensive. And I said it was 5+ years to rebuild, the technology base for Intel. We haven't even gotten there yet. 18A last week, an important milestone to that end. And then the shift of the industry to AI. And those were the two big factors that led to this being the case.
Did Intel miss it? Like, when did Intel take its eye off the ball in terms of looking towards AI? How do you kind of go back and just break down what happened?
It was a long journey, right? Intel made a set of bad decisions over 15 years. This was the rebuilding of Intel, lost technical leadership, wasn't led by technologists, for many years, and rebuilding, core technology, manufacturing, supply chains, process technology. And yeah, we were late on AI as well, but this was way long decisions that were made, that put it in a difficult position. And, to the leadership of Intel today, great milestone last week, and I wish nothing but the best. This is seminally important for the nation. We need leading R&D. We need leading manufacture at scale in the U.S. for our supply chains.
So now that we're in this position, do you look at what's happening? Sort of the other large question out there is, are we in some kind of AI boom, but also some would think about it in the context of it a bubble? There's a lot of leverage in the system. There's a lot of cash, but then there's a whole bunch of other folks who are trying to build these data centers, and whether there's the energy component side of it, or whether you think about the real estate component. There's just a whole lot of things happening at one time.
Yeah, and are we in an AI bubble? Of course, right? We were in an internet bubble. Of course we are. We're hyped, we're accelerating, we're putting enormous leverage into the system. That said, I don't see it ending for several years. I do think we have, an industry shift to AI, as Jensen has talked about, and I agree with this, that businesses are yet to really start materially benefiting from it. We're displacing all of the internet and the service provider industries as we think about it today. We have a long way to go.
What's the sign that would be too much for you?
Well, and what's the risk of it being too much, which I want to come back to as well. Okay. To me, there's a set of technologies on the horizon, some of which we're driving, like our snow cap, where we're promising to be 100x better in power performance. Meaning a gigawatt data center, I can do it in 10 megawatts and deliver the same AI performance. And not just snow cap, but a whole range of disruptive technologies. And I think they start materializing in the latter part of the decade.
Okay.
So, I do think in that sense, nothing is changing this path for several years. That said, it will change. These are radical improvements in AI efficiency that occur this year. However, today we're not chip limited, we're not capital limited, we're power limited. And against that, we have underinvested in the energy resources of the nation for a decade and a half, maybe 2 decades. So if the bubble induces us to build energy capacity, that is a really good thing, because energy capacity equals economic capacity.
The big question, though, is there enough cash on the other side? So OpenAI makes these big commitments for all of these build-outs. And the question is, are they ultimately going to have the cash to pay for it, right? That is, whether it's Anthropic or OpenAI or you name the company, is there going to be a moment? And it's not to say that Meta doesn't have the money or Google doesn't have the money or, any of these companies don't have or Amazon doesn't have the money. But right now, shareholders seem to be applauding every time they spend more rather than less. Yeah. But there could always be a turn in the market. And the question is, could that happen? And What would the implication?
Yeah, I think fundamentally we're a couple of years away from it. I do think we're in this bubble enthusiasm that's
But when you say a couple years away from people saying there isn't enough cash on the other side, is there? Well, I guess that's the fundamental question. Well, do the economics make sense?
Well, I think there's unquestioned energy in the economics now that will be materialized. At what point do those economic underpinnings change? And I say one of them will be the technology underpinnings. When all of a sudden I can accomplish the same with 1/10 or 1/100th the energy or capital requirements. That will be dislocated. Also at some point, we're over leveraged, right? And we're not seeing the materialization of the revenue impacts on these companies as well. But right now we're clearly seeing good economic returns, at least at the hardware level of the AI companies. So that'll be a second factor. A third factor is, how far can you go in the leverage and change in the game. Well, I think we have a couple of years to go.
What do you think of the AMD OpenAI deal? What do you think of the NVIDIA OpenAI deal?
Well, clearly the round tripping, right, of economics has, been spoken about. I'm not a financial expert in that respect, but it's a way of essentially driving somebody else to use your money to buy your products. I think the quality of those earnings clearly can't be seen as the same as somebody else putting their capital at risk. But that said, to me, it's this continuing energy of the bubble that we're in.
Bubble, yeah.
What would either make the investment that the United States made? You said it depends on whether it works, whether the fabs. How do you decide whether it works or not? What's at play there? How can we need to have them here, don't we?
Yeah, and I think some of these new investments. AI has blown the doors off technology. We're rebuilding the entire technology stack, right. Joe, right? From the semiconductor processes, to new cryogenic cooling, to optics, the whole thing is being rebuilt. It's just, my only disappointment of my career as a technologist, I'm not 20 years younger. This is the most thrilling period of history to be a technologist.
So how could it get screwed up for Intel?
Yeah.
What would happen?
Well, for Intel, okay, they got to finish the job. And unless they start having third parties build in their fabs, it doesn't matter, right? The Intel products cannot support that investment by itself. And these technology disruptions, some of those like our superconducting, 100 times more power performant. So these are industry.
Is it 50-50 that it works, or where do you think we are right now?
Well, I think in this sense, the government coming in is helpful. Because they're going to be putting the heavy hand of the U.S. government to drive.
But you said it'll only be good for the government to come in if it works, and you really don't seem to know whether it's going to work or not.
I don't, right? But we need third parties. We need Qualcomm, Intel, or Qualcomm, Apple, NVIDIA. All of the major wafer consumers to come into Intel and use those fabs.
Well, the problem
that is
that
critical.
The government could exert pressure on them to do just that because the government has a vested interest. And I think Andrew is asking philosophically whether it's a good thing, not just
Well, and then the other question is, where I was going to go with it is, do you think that the president or the government can put pressure on an Apple or somebody else to start buying chips effectively from Intel? And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a great thing.
It's a great thing.
It's a great thing, absolutely, right? Because we need to reshore these supply chains. We need to bring these supply chains back to the U.S., period, stop. The article just last week by the Wall Street Journal about the Taiwan energy capacity, was very indicative, something we've spoken about for a couple of years. This is precarious. We have to build resilience to our supply chain, and them exerting pressure to see that occur, to me, is a good thing.
And how should we think about it, just so the American public ultimately spending more? Meaning, I assume, if we're doing all of this, there is going to be some kind of inflationary effect.
Right. Well, whether that's seen through the tariffs that are being put in place, right, through those, or other implications, but reshoring our supply chains is essential for the nation, right, because the dislocative effects of even a minor disruption of these supply chains far outweighs the economic, implications for the nation.
It was rare earths last week that people were worried about.
To me, the big three: semiconductors, rare earths, and energy capacity.
Are we further along with semiconductors than the other two areas?
I think all three of them are at risk, right, in that regard, and require the strong hand of the government driving all three. the provocations on rare earths and the recent trade again, which was just a shot across the bow. The weakness in our energy capacity as a nation. We're about to come out of stealth with a new nuclear uprating company to address that.
Well, we had Exelon CEO here earlier today. His thought is that the utility companies should be allowed to own not just the lines, but also the means of powering this stuff up. Do you believe that that's the way, or do you think it has to be the government overseeing all of this to compete with China?
I think in some aspects of the energy problem, I think more is driven by less. More capacity will result from less regulation. And I think, having capacity behind the grid, relationships that are unleashing, the cloud providers and the AI providers, I think there's good there. But there's also technologies. We've underinvested in our nuclear capacity. Today, I think the number is 49 reactors under construction in China and 0 in the U.S. Right?
Wow.
These are dreadful numbers.
We love having you. We come on back?
Thank you, Andrew.
Okay.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you,
Joe.
Coming up on Squawk Pod, President Trump takes the podium in Jerusalem.
People will write about this. This will be in books 100 years from now.
We have former Biden senior advisor Amos Hochstein on what this means for progress in the Middle East.
I think you still have these two Middle Easts, and I don't think we should be fooled by one side that is focused on growth while the other side is still at near conflict all the time.
You're listening to Squawk Pod with Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Here's Joe.
President Trump has arrived, apparently, and do I see him?
Yeah, I think that's him at the podium.
I mean, this is a remarkable moment, folks. Can we just, I know you think I'm oftentimes critical of the president. This is one of those moments. No, this is one of those historic moments that is just really beyond. I have to say, you have to give him credit. Jared Kushner. I mean, just the whole, this is one of those moments. By the way, people will write about this this will be in books 100 years from now.
People
and the
said that
release
about
of the 20 remaining hostages this morning, just before this, the emotion around that, they did not release pictures of that out of respect for the privacy of the hostages coming back. But reports from there suggest that many of those hostages were in better shape than had been feared, that they were on their feet, they were talking and able to go through some of these things. So seeing, eventually we will get pictures from that.
Yeah, I guess we're gonna have to wait for the president to do this, because this is the opposition leader speaking right now. Not sure how oppositional he's going to be with the hostages all coming home at this point. But we'll monitor it, and I guess we're going to go to it when we do hear the president begin his address.
After 2 harrowing years in darkness and captivity, 20 courageous hostages are returning to the glorious embrace of their families, and it is glorious. 28 more precious loved ones are coming home at last to rest in this sacred soil for all of time. And after so many years of unceasing war and endless danger, today the skies are calm, the guns are silent, the sirens are still, and the sun rises on a holy land that is finally at peace, a land and a region that will live, God willing, in peace for all eternity.
Bring on Amos Hochstein. He served as a senior advisor and Middle East negotiator for former President Biden. He's now a global managing partner with TWG. Pretty amazing to just be watching this, I think. Amos, what are your thoughts?
I think it's an incredible day, an incredible moment. A lot of credit to the administration and to Jared Kushner in particular, Steve Witkoff, for getting to this day. But 20 people who've been in hell for 2 years as prisoners and hostages are now released back to their families, and the bloodshed in Gaza stopping. I mean, this is really a momentous day.
Right up to when the hostages were released, I think people were still holding their breath, Amos. And now we start holding it about, I guess, the additional phases of the agreement and how that works. But this has got to be a pretty good sign that there was no last minute problems or roadblocks. Or I don't know what we could have expected. Were you expecting this to come off like it did, or did you think there might be some last minute hitches based on Hamas?
No, I didn't really think there would be hitches. I mean, even in the ceasefire in January, the releases happened as they were intended. I think that also all the pressure and the summit tomorrow and so on, I think that the focus was already beyond today's hostage release. I think the real question is, what do you do from here? And I don't want to take away. Today is a tremendously great moment. And again, I'm grateful to my successors and to our successors who've, in the Trump administration, Jared and Steve in particular, for doing this. But I do think it's hard. One of the issues that Israel always had was, do we withdraw before there's the day after plan in place? Meaning, because the minute we withdraw, Hamas takes over. And so what we've seen is Hamas has in fact taken over the territory in Gaza that they are in control of, which is not all of it, of course. And so the concern now is, how do you bring in another force when they're already reasserting control? What requires them to, or forces them to lay down their arms and stop their control of Gaza? And that's, I think, going to be a very difficult thing to achieve as time goes by.
Right. And I'm wondering, what your view is on the likelihood of this playing out exactly as imagined by the negotiators.
I think that all the phases beyond this one, there are no details behind it. I think the negotiators decided as a tactic to get to a yes first and then figure out the details later. And I think that's probably was the right approach. But that means that we don't really have anything that's going to happen in the coming days and weeks. And I think that we're probably going to be frozen here for a little while as they figure out what the next step is. And I think we have two pictures that we have to look at. One is Israel and its neighbors, which is Israel, Hamas, and what happens in Gaza, what happens in the West Bank. But then you have the bigger picture, which is what happens in the Middle East. And can you get to normalization with Saudi Arabia, which I think you can. And can you get, once that happens, do you get broader normalization with Muslim countries? So I think that we're really at a critical moment, but also one that has a lot of potential for the Middle East.
Things happen gradually, and then they happen all at once. I think someone said that. I'm not sure how to view this, because I was thinking about going all the way back to, I don't know, think of the names almost, like Anwar Sadat or Menachem Begin or Golda Meir. I think about how long this has been such an intractable issue that the world has faced. Now, sooner or later, we were hoping for some type of, for lack of a better word, like an Arab Spring or a move into the 21st century for that part of the world to more closely resemble the West. Is this really it, do you think? And like I said, it's been gradual. Like, slowly we've seen certain countries that we used to think no way it would ever happen. One by one, it started happening till we got to this point. Is it possible to be optimistic about the whole region right now?
One, I think you should always be optimistic. That's what makes us able to deliver. But look, I think this is still an intractable crisis and conflict. You still have the West Bank that is in a very difficult spot with settlements growing and agitation between the Palestinian population and the Israeli population growing, not diminishing. Gaza is still 2 million people that are hostile to Israel and Israel hostile to Gaza. So you still have Hezbollah that is not yet disarmed in Lebanon. You have a lot of dark forces. So I think you have two different Middle Easts. You have the Middle East of the Arabian Gulf. UAE led the way with Bahrain, but now if Saudi joins, that is one Middle East that is focused exactly as you said on the 21st century, on becoming a powerful economies that are, where oil is only their bonus, where they can have a balanced budget without oil, and doing that through technology and growth. And then you have other countries in the Middle East that are still very hostile to the West, economies that are at a very different place, very low economies with failed states. So I think you still have these two Middle Easts, and I don't think we should be fooled by one side that is focused on growth while the other side is still at near conflict all the time.
Amos, what is your sense, though, of whether Hamas ever gets effectively disarmed? Because as long as they have arms, doesn't this remain an intractable issue?
Yes, and that's what I think. That's why I said before. I think it's very difficult to imagine them laying their arms. What you're seeing already, the second every place where Israel's withdrawn, Hamas has reasserted its control. And whether they're calling themselves Hamas or they're putting a new, label on the uniform, but Hamas is asserting control and they have weapons. And they're going to continue to grow in those areas. So it's very difficult for me to imagine that some kind of magical foreign force is going to come in and agree to gun battles with Hamas and achieve that. I think there's going to have to be a broader reconciliation on the Israeli-Palestinian issue. I think the two-state solution is not dead yet, but it is severely wounded. And there's going to have to be some kind of understanding of how the Palestinians govern themselves outside of international control. But I think it's very difficult.
Can you speak to this issue, which is, and we were talking about it around the table during commercial break, I, for example, think this is an amazing, historic, and fabulous day. I think Joe and Becky do too. Having said that, you go online and the response is as negative could be about Israel and about the reputation of the country, frankly, about Jews. I mean, it's all wrapped up together. And I wonder, to the extent you're thinking about that, how you think that changes or doesn't change under these circumstances.
Look, I think there are a couple of things I would say. One, it's devastating to see after 2 years since the horrific events of October 7 that Israel is the one that is isolated around the world. And part of that is, to some degree, an overreach in how they executed the war, especially in the last 9 months. Civilian toll is very, very high. But there's always going to be a double standard when it comes to Israel.
Why do you say that? There's always going to be a double standard.
Because there always has been. Look, it attracts the attention. Conflicts in Israel and around Israel attract the attention like no other conflict does. This is not whataboutism. There is a conflict in Sudan that is devastating, with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of casualties of Ukraine and so on. There are conflicts around the world. This one captures the imagination around the world, in every part of the world. And so there's always going to be this fascination with it and a much bigger attention given to it. But look, I think that we have to focus on the fact that people were marching down the streets demanding for a ceasefire now, demanding for the war to end. The war has now ended, for now at least. The ceasefire is there. And people should be happy. Those who were calling for it should be out in the streets celebrating. As you said, they are for some reason not doing that.
Right.
That's somewhat bizarre to me.
No, I've seen the list on Twitter of the Hollywood types that not a word. They were so animated about it. Let me ask you one more thing, Amos, because there was some tepid praise from some former Biden officials, Jake Sullivan, that, time and circumstance finally happened for Trump, where our original deal that we had is finally getting done because of time and circumstance. And I understand that, how that can happen. But do you think that, I don't know, what happened to Iran's proxies, what happened in Syria, what happened in Doha, I mean, all the things that we've seen that have sort of compromised, Fordo, in terms of steps that the United States and Israel has taken, don't you think that this became a lot more likely and possible given some proactive things that the Trump administration did in support of Israel?
Look, I think that there was a lot of pressure on Israel and there was a lot of pressure on Hamas. I think that there is never one reason why things happen, and I've been pretty open about the fact that I think that the negotiators here, Jared and Steve, have done an excellent job in getting this. There were a number of phases to this. One was when the attack happened, the Biden administration, myself included, we were determined to make sure that Iran did not fire a bunch of missiles, that Hezbollah did not come into the war at that time. We sent out enormous amount of military U.S. military capability to the Middle East to defend Israel, to save Israel from further destruction. Israel that looked very different on October 8th than it does today. We had the ceasefire with Lebanon that I negotiated that, as to some degree, models for how the governing of the relationship between Hamas, Gaza, and Israel post-ceasefire now is going to happen. The proxies were weakened dramatically already then. I think there is a feeling that in January there was a ceasefire in place that was achieved right on the seam between the Biden and the Trump administration, and that perhaps that could have been turned into the permanent deal at that time. And I think that's probably true. And the last 8 months of delay in that I don't blame the Trump administration. I think Israel walked away from that ceasefire at that time and did not want to implement it. That cost the lives of a lot more people and delayed not only the ceasefire, but also caused a lot of harm for Israel's reputation around the world. Yep. I think the Trump administration finally understood, especially after the attack in Doha, that there needs to be a change and this has to come to an end, and the pressure was given and both parties had to compromise. I hope that this now holds. But I give credit to the Trump administration, but I also think that this is a continuum of what's happened over the last 2 years since the horrific events that are literally we're right on the anniversary of 2 years ago.
Quick, we used to talk to you about oil all the time. Obviously, oil was under 60 for a while today. And I was going to just needle you a little. You think, how much is the SPR still depleted? Maybe we should buy it back. Should we be buying it back now, Amos? Would you suggest that sell high, buy low? Does that sound like a good idea at this point?
Absolutely. They should be buying, and they should be buying it into the SPR so that we have it for the next time that there's a crisis. Look, the one thing we know about oil markets is whenever it's going down really low, it's going to come back up at some point, at some day. Oil demand is still high. But by the way, the oil price has a large impact on what's going to happen in Gaza. The ability of other Arab states to be able to support and to rebuild $1 trillion of what's going to be necessary in Gaza at $60 a barrel is quite difficult. But I would buy back into the SPR.
Just want to get you to put out a strong buy on oil. Amos, thank you. Appreciate it. It's a great day for a lot of reasons.
That's the podcast for today. Thank you for starting your week with us. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Weekday mornings on CNBC starting at 6 Eastern and going all the way until 9. To get the smartest takes and analysis from that 3-hour TV show, follow Squawk Pod wherever you're listening now. We'll meet you right back here tomorrow. Have a great day.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.